Hey everyone, and welcome back to a very special episode of Deep Dive with Jamie Stein. And I say very special because we are going to be getting in a topic that I feel has really swept the pop culture zeitgeist in the last few months. I am, of course, talking about none other than the HBO TV series Heated Rivalry. I'm pausing now in case listeners at home are letting out a squeal of excitement. That's how deeply it feels. This like taps into something in the cultural zeitgeist. So, when anything strikes this big a nerve, there's always an invitation, I feel, to look at it at a little bit of a deeper level and maybe see if we can decode what this might be striking in the collective and why it's striking something so deep and enthusiastic in all types of ways. And I thought, who better to join me on this ride than old friend, dear colleague, repeat podcast guest, and in my mind, a bit of a resident expert when it comes to all things pop culture queer, Jess Rothschild of not just Hot Takes and Deep Dives, but several special podcast docuseries such as Finding Fire Island and most recently the breakout hit Cult of Body and Soul. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you. I mean, I hope, yes, the listeners are squealing with delight, but I think they're also like, Jamie, we wanted this on Christmas morning. Like, what took you so long?
And to that, I say, wisdom is not on an accelerated timeline. No, I mean, I'm being jokingly pretentious, but I also mean that. I mean, it does take time to metabolize. Well, first of all, you got to watch the fucking series. Meaning I have to watch the fucking series.
Yeah.
And then I have to metabolize it. I think as anyone can probably tell who listens to this podcast, I'm not in a rush. And that's because I actually really believe what I'm saying. I think that information takes time, and that we live in a world that tends to rush and speak too soon. And I like to sit with things, and I like to be with things, and I like to get clarity before I speak.
I love that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, on that note, I actually do have a lot of thoughts up top. So you and I had sort of talked about this a little bit prior to the recording. I have been developing my thoughts, and I think what I'm so aware of before we even begin is that this is, of course, what we would call a gay love story in the sense that it's a man-on-man love story. Maybe not technically gay, because the fact of the matter is Rozanoff, and I guess for anyone listening at home who maybe hasn't seen the show or doesn't know much about it, which at this point feels so unlikely because it's like on the tips of everyone's tongues. This is a dramatic series on HBO Max, about two star professional hockey players who are on rival teams. One is the Russian Rozanoff and the other is the Canadian Hollander. And essentially they fall in love. And it's more or less the story of their somewhat forbidden relationship, not just as two straight presenting hockey players in a macho world. And it's a little dated. I mean, it takes place. Do you remember what years it actually takes place between?
Yeah, it starts in, I think, 2007. I think 2006, 2007 is when the recruitment for the rookie season begins.
So fairly recent past, not exactly present day, but in the recent past. And so, yeah, it's forbidden both in terms of them being gay / sexually fluid. And I say that because Rozanoff is sexually fluid. He's sleeping with both men and women. Hollander is gay identified. But yes, they're existing in a macho, heteronormative hockey world. And then, of course, as suggested by the title, they are rivals. So there's different layers and levels of forbidden romance in their relationship. And that's the show. And like I said, it struck quite a chord. People are really thrilled by the relationship. And then there's also just been a lot of discourse about why people are reacting to it so passionately, why women are reacting to it so passionately. And then there's elements of kind of like parasocial relationships between the fans and the actors and whatnot. So there's just a lot here for us to dig into. But having said all that, I definitely had a lot of initial thoughts because, like I said, it is predominantly a gay love story. And as someone who is a man who is attracted to men and has sort of grown up witnessing a real evolution of gay male relationships in film and TV, I definitely did have a lot of thoughts just about where I was seeing this in the larger trajectory of that pop culture journey. And so, yeah, I just wanted to take some time up top just to talk through those thoughts and use them as a doorway to my initial hits of what I feel this might be tapping into in the collective. So I'm just going to kind of front load this with my initial hits, and talk for a little while. And then, once I've sort of worked through that, I'd love to kind of open it up to you for your thoughts, your responses, your questions, and then we can kind of just see where it wants to go.
Perfect.
All right, you guys. Yeah, I mean, I just want to say on a personal level, the show did really land with me quite powerfully. Well, let me be specific. The relationship between Rosenoff and Hollander landed with me quite powerfully. And I was really thinking about why, because it did land in an exhilarating way. It was exciting. It was passionate. It was alive. It triggered aliveness in me. And so, like I said, I was really thinking about sort of why that was. And it really did get me thinking about the trajectory of, gay male characters in film, in TV, in my lifetime, and just how that's played out. And it's really interesting because I started going back to the late 90s, and just sort of thinking about Will and Grace, for example, which was just that was like a breakthrough moment in pop culture, right? Like in terms of gay male visibility and representation in the media. And it was, and I want to be clear, when I'm going to sort of talk about different cultural milestones. And I want to say, I don't want it to be misunderstood that I'm not knocking these milestones. They were milestones. They were breakthroughs. And I loved Will and Grace. I watched it. It's funny. You know what I mean? I loved Will and Grace. So nothing against it, right? It was a breakthrough in the sense that it brought, like I said, like extreme gay visibility to mainstream America. Now, having said that, it was extremely neutered, of course. I mean, you had Will, who was very sexless. The very premise of the show is just about him and his codependent relationship with his girl best friend. I don't really remember the specific details, but he was rarely in any type of relationship. And then just on top of that, he was very kind of passive in his energy, very cerebral, very neurotic. Again, he was defined by his codependent friendship with his woman best friend. And then you had Jack, who was saucier, but again, very neutered, very chaste. It was a very chaste show, one could say. So, a cultural breakthrough, but definitely very sexless. And then it was like around that time too, especially like early aughts, we started getting what I would call these kind of mediocre gay romantic comedies, like these independent gay romantic comedies. So I'm thinking now about like Broken Hearts Club with Dean Cain. I'm thinking now about like All Over the Guy, I think is what it was called. It was written and directed by Dan Bucatinsky, who, by the way, went on to be a major creator behind The Comeback, which I love, which is coming back. I'm so excited for The Comeback to come back for a third season. I'd include like Trick with Christian Campbell as part of this. But basically, it was a spate of gay romantic comedies, which again was bringing gay male visibility to cinema in a way that to me felt definitely very heteronormative. These were very cute romantic comedies, that were very much like a knockoff of like a conventional mainstream romantic comedy. And what's interesting to me about them now that I'm talking about them, like in terms of the three that I just mentioned, they would feature kind of what we could call like a conventionally hot heartthrob lead. Like that would be sort of the object of affection of the main character. But then the main characters, kind of like Will, were these cerebral, neurotic guys who are in their heads and worrying about things. And the movies themselves, like I said, very sexless. They were very chatty, very quippy, again, very cute, and then kind of like just a repackaged version of like the Hollywood fairy tale romance. Not a lot of bite to them, let's just say, right? So then you sort of had those where I guess if we want to like track an evolution, we're going from the totally kind of chaste world of Will and Grace to romance, but it's sort of like a toothless romance now, right? And so then we arrive at Brokeback Mountain, which I mean, I don't think we can talk about this without talking about Brokeback Mountain. And I want to say Brokeback Mountain was a huge, and I mean, I think it's a beautiful film. I think Ang Lee's a great director. There's so much to recommend it. It's a great movie. And I think what was so breakthrough about Brokeback Mountain was the fact that in a way it was taking gay cinema or gay stories out of the margins or the sidelines, and it was putting it into the mainstream. It's putting it into the heartland of America. And these weren't quote unquote stereotypical gay guys. They were conventionally masculine in the way that we typically think of masculinity. They were cowboys. They were movie stars. It was Jake Gyllenhaal. It was Heath Ledger. And like I said, it put it into the heartland. I mean, their sexuality was almost incidental, which I think was part of what was so both universal about it and also breakthrough about it. And they were in love, and there was even some passion and there was even some sex. I mean, literally there was like a sex scene. So that was another breakthrough moment. And when I look back on it, from the perspective of 2026, I'm also aware, and again, I'm not saying this in a denigrating way. I'm just saying this from the macro cultural perspective. It was also a tragic, tortured love story, where in a way they're really paying a price for their love. Again, I don't mean this in a mean way, but it's weepy. It's like a weepy kind of melodrama where, yes, there is passion. Yes, there is sex. But like I said, there's kind of a price paid for it. And there's definitely kind of like a heaviness to it for sure. And I think I'll just sort of use that as a doorway for maybe what we could call a whole other trend of like gay male cinema, of like your Philadelphias, your Angels in America. And by the way, again, love Philadelphia, love Jonathan Demme. I watched Philadelphia this last year. It made me cry. It's not a knock against it as a movie, but it's just these stories, again, these sort of tragic gay stories where the sexuality or the homosexuality is sort of deeply paired with life or death stakes, misery, and almost like kind of like a sense of like punishment, if you will. And then I want to say all throughout this, you kind of then have this sort of subculture of gay cinema of like the Eating Out series, or like shows like Dante's Cove on niche cable networks, or I think what's that director's name? David Dakota, I think was his name, who made these like straight to video gay erotic thrillers like set in like fraternities, and and so that's kind of where you'd get more heat and sex. But there, in my mind, looking back, there was kind of a real division where it was, to me, it almost feels like the split you sometimes historically sense in sort of larger gay culture of like, it almost felt like the bathhouses of like gay cinema. Like you can go and have naughty fun and have sex and yeah, playtime, but it's in these kind of like low budget, sort of sleazier niche movies and TV shows. So yeah, it sort of just definitely felt from like a macro perspective, there was kind of like a split there. And then we sort of come around to most recently to something like Modern Family, which has that series regular gay couple, which was really interesting to me because it's almost like if I trace the arc of it, like if we go back to Will and Grace, right? Modern Family represents like a deeper integration of like gay men into society, right? Because it's like they are a couple, they have a relationship, they have kids, right? It's not quite the same like a single gay male who's like totally sexless and totally like terminally single and he's there with his woman best friend. But then having said that, in sort of tracking the through line, there's still something so incredibly, definitely heteronormative about it. It's sort of like they're sort of integrated into sort of like a heteronormative framework. And again, part of that is they're very chaste. They're very sexless. They're sort of just integrated into suburbia. And so it's like when I sort of take a step back and look at it, I'm like, it's so interesting. You can kind of track a deeper integration. We can sort of see the quote unquote progress over the 20 years. And yet it still feels like there's just been an absence of fire, heat, and sexuality integrated with all of this. It's kind of either or, right? It's either naughty sex or it's kind of this like, or it's love, and it's either safe and neutered and chatty and neurotic, or it's like deep, dark, punishing, weepy, and tragic. These are sort of the trends that I've seen. And so then, that's kind of where heated rivalry enters the picture. And I think for me, there was so much that struck me about heated rivalry. And I want to say up top, like, I'm using the gay relationship context as a doorway into deeper archetypal themes and energies. It's hitting, but we have to sort of take it one layer at a time. But yeah, in terms of the gay romance, the gay love story, I feel like, not maybe for the first time, I think there have been other examples here and there, but in terms of something that's really hitting the collective in a true mainstream way, for the first time, first of all, you have these two embodied, what you might call masculine men. And I want to be clear, because this is going to be one of those conversations where we are going to get into like archetypal masculine and feminine energy. And I know this gets tricky for people. So let me just sort of say up top, when I say embodied masculine men, yes, it's a certain type of masculinity. So I'm not saying this is the definitive version of masculinity. I'm not saying this is all masculinity. I'm not saying this is all men. I'm not saying this is what all men should be. I am saying it is a certain type of embodied masculinity that I do think is also a stand-in for archetypal masculine energy that can live in all of us, whether we're men, women, or anywhere in between. This is me getting ahead of myself, but I want to say it's two men who are embodying a certain type of masculinity, right? They are top athletes. They are competitive. They are physically strong. They're goal-oriented. To me, it's almost like warrior energy, right? Like, this is not Will from Will and Grace. This is not Jack. This is not neurotic Dan Bukatinsky and All Over the Guy. These are guys who have that competitive fire and heat in them. They're playing to win. They're strong, like physically, mentally, emotionally. Again, it's like warrior energy, right? And they're also sexually alive. It's like they're erotically charged, and not just erotic. Not only are they sexually alive and erotically charged, that warrior energy is part of that driving life force. Like, that warrior energy that compels them to go out and kill it on the ice is part of what drives their heat and their passion in the bedroom. So there's absolutely nothing neutered here. Their spirits are on fire. Their loins are on fire. They're not chaste. Again, it's a certain type of strong masculine fire. But then on top of all of this, and it's interesting, I'm getting chills just even saying this, they're also in love. So there's feelings here. They have chemistry. They flirt. They care about each other. They have feelings for each other. So not only are their spirits on fire, not only are their loins on fire, but their heart is on fire too. And it's sort of like there's almost like an unmitigated masculine, again, a certain type of masculinity, but an unmitigated force of masculinity here, where there is this warrior spirit married with this unapologetic sexuality, married with a deep sense of love, care, and sensitivity. Warrior married with eros, married with love and good intentions deep down. And by the way, I mean, I don't think this even needs to be said. It's not to say that they're not complex humans. It's not to say that they don't sometimes shut down. It's not to say that obviously there's some apology in the sense that they're scared of the ramifications of, what their love might mean. But we're talking macro, bigger picture. When it's just the two of them in their bedroom, there's a total lack of apology. It's almost like the lack of apology isn't so much internal. It's more just about sort of like what it might mean for others rather than some sort of like deep, dark shame within themselves. And on top of all of this, it's fun. It's like playful. Like, yes, there's stakes, but again, there's heat. There's competitive spirit. There's the thrill of the chase. There's the thrill of the game. And so again, like just historically for me, I feel like with a couple rare exceptions, usually actually it's interesting, usually from other countries. Like I'm thinking now of like the original British Queer as Folk. I'm also thinking now there was a UK movie. What was that movie called? I think it was called Beautiful Thing. I'm going to go back and double check. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think the two male leads may have been soccer players in that. I can't remember if they weren't professional soccer players, but it was a similar vibe of two embodied men who have this combination of sort of unapologetic love and heat with each other. But up until now, certainly in terms of America, certainly in terms of like mainstream storytelling, I had never really seen something that captured and embodied like my own personal experience of like what male on male attraction can be like, of like, again, a certain type of masculine energy, interfacing with each other, supporting one another, feeding and fueling one another, and not in a way though that is about power or domination, not in a way that is about like objectification of someone else, not in a way that's about, like one person is powerful and the other person is disempowered, but instead, again, it's a heart-based, fiery, masculine sense of love, spirit, and sexuality. And so I personally believe that's a huge part of like what this is hitting in the collective on an even deeper level, which is that Hollander and Rosenoff are essentially kind of representing or inviting in a reclamation of a type of loving masculine warrior force that I think has been missing for a long time. It's almost like I keep wanting to say like a new version of the masculine, except I don't think it's new at all. I think it's very native to a lot of masculine identifying people and a lot of men, which is about essentially the heart-centered warrior, the heart-centered man who isn't, because I think when we think heart-centered men, right, it's often like, oh, the sensitive new age guy who's like sensitive to all the nuances, or it's like a spiritual bypasser, right? Who's like loving and flowing. What we don't think of when we think of like heart-centered men, I think traditionally, is like an embodied masculine warrior who's got this fiery heart, this fucking powerful sense of eros, and a deep sense of love and also fun and pleasure. And I think historically, culture hasn't really known how to hold this type of masculinity where it's like the eros, the powerful sexuality, isn't softened to make it safe and acceptable, right? And where their strength, their aggression, their ambition, their will to win is intact. And it's not threatening because, again, it's not used to dominate other people in a controlling or dehumanizing way. It's actually used kind of like as a force of good to push each other, to test our limits, to support each other, sort of to be at our best. And I think like this to me is like a huge archetypal recode where power circulates through the relationship rather than calcifies. And part of what I loved about Rosenoff and Hollander is the way that their sexual dynamic allows for back and forth power exploration, where most of the time Rosenoff is kind of taking the lead, but we also see times where Hollander comes out as sort of the more dominant one. There's like a sexual fluidity to them, and it's interesting. Even the casting of Connor's story as Rosenoff, who is kind of tends to be the more dominant one in the bedroom, but he's got a very feminine face. He's got these beautiful curly locks, beautiful eyes, beautiful lips. And sometimes I'd look at him and I'm like, oh, it's so interesting. He's got an almost kind of feminine beauty, and then watching someone like Hollander, who again is like this top tier athlete, being willing to bend over, to arch his back, to give into a certain kind of like what we might call feminine receptivity and surrender and sexuality. But none of this gender fluidity, none of this sexual fluidity, none of this power fluidity, none of it diminishes them as men in this world. And in fact, part of their masculinity to me, and part of the fun of their masculinity, is their willingness and their capacity to play with this fluidity. They're not threatened by it. There's not these traditional power codes around, oh, top versus bottom, and who's the man and who's the woman, and like, I'm dominating you, and I can't do that. Like, that's what I'm saying. There's sort of a lack of apology for it in the privacy of their bedroom. And so, like I said, I just think, to kind of wrap this all up, I have not seen this very often. And I think part of the reason why this is hitting so deeply is that this isn't about like gay archetypes. I think this is about a masculine archetype. I think that this is about a call and an invitation for a deeper, more embodied, more fiery masculinity in the collective. And this is the last thing I'll say about all this before I turn this around to you. I do think it's interesting it's coming through a gay love story, because the reason why I think it's coming through a gay love story is that, in a way, I think it's safer to come through that way. It's almost like it's transgressive, right? Because it's like a gay love story. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's transgressive. And it's almost like the medicine's coming in sideways, which I think is important for two reasons. One, obviously, you know, if we want to look at this from the point of view of we have been living in a patriarchal world, like if we kind of come at this from the perspective of like the patriarchy doesn't want there to be this kind of heart-centered masculine, because that's a threat to the patriarchy, which is about control, which is about power, which is about domination. So that could be what people typically refer to as the toxic masculine. It's going to want to keep the healthy masculine down, the fiery masculine warrior energy down. So in some ways, the medicine's coming in sideways because it's a safer way for it to come through and to slip through the cracks. But also, and this is where we start to get into like why are a lot of women responding so passionately to this? I also think it might be safer if you're like a woman or have a lot of feminine energy and this is hitting something in you, that like a deep longing, right, for this type of fiery, unapologetic, heart-centered masculine energy. I can also imagine growing up in a patriarchal system where this hasn't been modeled, that it can feel very dangerous or unsafe to let yourself know your deep desire for this kind of unmitigated masculine. Because again, unmitigated masculine, that's been dangerous historically. We tend to associate that with systems of destruction and domination. So again, to me, it's almost like heated rivalry is created, and I think this is the exact right time for it, because these conversations are elevating. I think we're ready for it. And it kind of feels like this transgressive sideways doorway into inviting in what I'm calling in the fiery masculine. And I think the world is needing it and wanting it right now, much in the same way that I've talked in this podcast about the call and the invitation for the dark feminine. I think there's the call and the invitation for the fiery masculine. So that's kind of what I see in all of this, a certain type of masculinity that's being invited in through the transgressive doorway of a homosexual relationship. And I think it's speaking to gay men. I think it's speaking to women and even straight men too, actually, based on the response. So that's my up top download.
Wow. Okay. So I want to say up top, listen, I love the show. I watched every episode. I thought it was great. I encouraged friends of mine who were about to bail on it after the first two episodes. I implored them to just like get to episode 3, get to episode 4. And so I want to say, I think this show has been accepted by the culture at large for a few very specific reasons. I think number one, because it only stars 2 characters outside of the side character, the smoothie guy and Francois Arnault. If you're just looking at, people are taken with the show because of Hollander and Rosanov. I think because it's only about these 2 characters. I think because they are masculine characters, and finally because it's only 6 episodes. I am willing to go to bat on that take. That is the reason. that this show is successful. If you had allowed this show to go to a full, like, 10 episodes, 20 episodes, the way A Queer as Folk used to run in the year 2000, it would never sustain. The audience would bail, because I think it could never sustain because there's so few characters and there's so little story. I mean, I do think if you compare it to A Queer as Folk, which was less beloved than this show, I think specifically by gay men, Queer as Folk largely was not accepted by gay men because
the American one, just to clear
the American
this up.
one, the American Queer as Folk. The American Queer as Folk ran on Showtime for 5 years, and each season on average was 15 to 18 episodes. That was the old, like, cable model. And it was an ensemble show, and it in large respect was rejected by the gay male audience because you were forced to deal with storylines involving, we were still talking about AIDS. We were still talking about gay bashing. We were talking about gay straight alliance. We were also talking about characters who had a more feminine flair. You were dealing with queenie characters. You're not dealing with any feminine queenie characters on Heated Rivalry. Therefore, the audience is able to swallow it a bit more. And I think also with an ensemble show, you're dealing with so many characters and juggling so many storylines. It offers way too much an opportunity to not be into half of those characters. Oh, I hate Michael. I hate Emmett. I hate Ted. This one's a drug addict. This one's that. And so I think we can't, like, I just want to bring Queer as Folk into the conversation because, that having been said, it was kept on the air. Why? For the same reason Heated Rivalry has been such a phenomenon, and it's because women loved Queer as Folk. Women were the ones who were buying the DVDs. It had a small, dedicated following of gay men, but in large part, it was gay and straight women who kept Queer as Folk alive, much like this show. So I kind of just want to say that. And also another thing I want to bring into the conversation, the character of Brian Kinney, who's like the lead character played by Gail Harold on Queer as Folk, gave me a very similar vibe to Connor Story, who plays Ilya. Like, it's the same sort of like hot shot. He was a hot shot, like, ad exec, in the way that Ilya is like a hot shot, sexy hockey player with like an attitude. And so it was giving, the whole time I'm watching this guy, I'm like, oh my God, I haven't felt a character like this since Brian Kinney. I haven't been captivated by a male character like this since, in terms of playing with sexuality, being so confident in his sexuality. And yeah, so I absolutely loved the character of Ilya and the performance by Connor Story. But does any of that, like, mean anything to you?
Yeah, there's a couple things I'll say. I mean, I think it's interesting. I love it because you're looking at it from the cultural perspective, and also even just from the form perspective of, like, the nuts and bolts of the TV shows and, like, the format and the episode numbers and whatnot. And what's so interesting to me is I actually think that actually weaves in quite organically with the deeper archetypal energy. So I mean, I watched like one or two episodes of the US Queer as Folk. And for me, I just had such a strong attachment to the British one and didn't feel the same zest and spirit. So I didn't stick with it. So I'm not, like, well-versed in the US version.
By the way, I if I didn't say this, the reason that I jumped to Queer as Folk above all of those shows and films that you mentioned, sort of like dotting queer history in cinema and television in the past 20, 25 years, the reason that really the only thing we can point to is Queer as Folk is because Queer as Folk, it was the only show that had raw animalistic sex, nudity, and bite to it. That was the only one that was not neutered. Later, there was the Jonathan Groff show called Looking, which took place in San Francisco about an ensemble group of friends, which was on HBO, which lasted 3 seasons. But again, it suffered the same plight of gay men rejecting it, because the fact is, they're playing real people. They're not playing hockey players. Like, no, how many, you know what I mean? Like, they're your very own Jamie Steins. Like, the guy could be a podcaster. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And actually, I did watch Looking because I liked Andrew High's. What was Weekend? He made that movie Weekend.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I really liked. For anyone who hasn't watched it, it's just a very small scale, intimate story of two men who meet over a weekend, and it's initially supposed to be a one night stand, and then they start developing feelings for each other, and it's a really sweet, beautifully made movie. So I did watch Looking, and so I want to say a couple things. So one, no, I really hear you naming something like this is important to you to name, and maybe we can even get into why shows like The American Queer as Folk and Looking don't find an audience, whereas this did, from both, cultural perspective, but also maybe what that means archetypally. But I hear you naming something that's really important, so I'm glad you're naming it. And on that note, it does just keep nagging at me. And again, this is kind of the intersection of archetype and culture. We are talking about stories about gay men, and I'm being very specific in my language to say gay men, because these are not stories about gay women. It's not stories about lesbian. Well, Queer as Folk, I think, maybe had some lesbian.
There was a lesbian couple in Queer as Folk, but they were very secondary. Right.
So I'm just naming that up top. We are talking about gay men. Take it or leave it, but just to name that, and to name that gay storytelling, gay film, gay TV does not just mean gay men. And yet we are talking about stories about gay men because Heated Rivalry is a story about two gay men. But yeah, coming back to what you were saying, it's so interesting because when you said people are watching it 6 episodes, it's about 2 characters, I was like, that totally makes sense. And that to me also represents or embodies the energy of Heated Rivalry. Like there's something about that. There's something about it's like it's like a jolt, it's like ferocity, it's like it's like a match that strikes, it's power, it's heat, it's a spark that flies. And so again, coming back, if I'm right about this, if this is tapping into a certain type of kind of archetypal masculine warrior energy, there is something about that feels energetically right for this, that we're kind of in and out of this like hot fire that comes up really quickly, takes you by storm, and then kind of leaves you a little bit dizzy. It's like that rush of warrior spirit. Like when you're out there on the ice, like you're skating with that puck, and you are like, I mean, I love that I'm talking about this as if I know anything that I'm talking about hockey, and then taking that swing to make that, but it's that jolt of adrenaline. So I think it's that. Right.
Yes.
And I think, it's interesting that you're saying this too, because, I think this series, and I don't mean this in an insulting way, it just is what it is. Like, I'm pretty sure it was low budget, right? It felt kind of low budget. And to your point, yes, it's very focused on these 2 people in this sort of small insular world, I think, again, by virtue of the budget. But also there's something, again, about that to me feels energetically right in terms of the intimacy. I'm just suddenly thinking of like, in order for like a spark to become a flame, you kind of have to like incubate it a little bit. There's something about, I think it would energetically leak a bit if it was bigger and broader and over many episodes. Like the whole point of it is the heat. And if it's not compressed, like I don't know a lot about like physics and chemistry, but I want to say like, I think there's something about compression that is central to literal heat and to lighting a fire. So it has to be compressed in a way in order to strike that match. And it's interesting that you're saying this because it's almost like, and this is kind of the point that I was making up top, I mean, I do see it as a gay love story, but it's almost like not even a gay love story. To me, this really is about what I said up top. Like, it feels like it is about this certain brand of masculine energy. And so, and I get it. Like, I get that could be a cause for criticism from like a cultural sexual identity, sexual politics perspective of like, yeah, they're 2 kind of like, we could say, if we want to be reductive, they're 2 bro athletes. They're both really good looking in a conventional way. They're both have great bodies in a conventional way. Hollander is half Japanese, but you could say they're both light-skinned, essentially white passing. You know, you can criticize it for that, and that's valid, and that's like a whole other conversation. But for me, it's almost like, yeah, I am viewing it through a lens where it's almost like the sexuality almost, even though I did find it thrilling as a gay guy, because I do think, I mean, that it's both things at once. I do think it embodied something that I don't typically see in pop culture. And I think that is why I delighted to the original Queer as Folk, the British one, because now that we're talking about it, it was fun. It was pleasurable. It did have this like kind of like heat to it and the spirit to it. I just remember watching it and being like, oh my God, like this speaks to my soul in some way. And again, that one movie, I'm going to have to Google it. I'm almost sure it was called Beautiful Thing, you know, which had a similar vibe to me where I was like, oh, this actually feels like home to me. So I guess on some level, I am saying it does speak to me in terms of my own lens of sexuality. And at the same time, I'm also not looking at it through that lens at all, if that makes sense. I'm looking at it through this archetypal lens of an announcement of a certain type of male eros and heat. And, you know, I guess if I want to double back around to the critical lens, much in the same way that part of me wonders if, you know, from an archetypal perspective and from like a systemic perspective, this invitation for a certain type of embodied warrior masculine energy has to come through a transgressive love story, a gay love story from the sidelines, is if everything we're talking about, it being too conventionally attractive, more or less white passing athletes who have a certain type of like social acceptance, if it kind of quote unquote has to come through that in order for the medicine to be received right now. But also I'll bring in another wrinkle, which is, to me, it also does feel very kind of post 90s, early aughts, in the sense that I feel like we did get a lot of those stories about, it's like, this is the thing. It's like, you can look at it so many different ways, right? Because it's like, you can look at it from the perspective of like, it's bullshit that like culture is accepting this love story between these two straight passing, like bro, macho, masculine dudes, right? But then the converse of that is there are a lot of people who look at the Will and the Jacks who are like, that's not fucking me. And this is a stereotype. And it's bullshit that this is gay identity. This is also interesting to me because I actually never get triggered by I don't get caught up in these conversations at all, even as someone who I more or less identifies as gay. I say more or less, just I think I've spoken to this before. I'm a man who's very attracted to men, but this is the point. I don't often see, the way that gay identity is often defined, especially when I was growing up, like 90s, late 90s, early aughts, I don't resonate with it. So I've never had an over-identity.
Like, you don't resonate with what specifically?
I've just never, like, I can go out to West Hollywood and have fun. I can go to Boys Town. I can have fun.
Yeah.
I'm not like, oh, this is home. I don't go to Fire Island and feel like this is home. It's a culture. Right. And I want to be very clear, because I feel like some people hear this and they're like, you're judging it. I'm not judging it. It's great. It's great for you. I'm saying it doesn't feel like home I'm getting sad. It doesn't feel like home for me. I've always felt very displaced because I'm like, I'm not straight, so I don't fully belong in the straight world. But the way this is defined by the world at large, and by the way, not just by gay people, by straight people, but the way this is defined culturally by the world, I do not feel at home there. It doesn't feel like my identity. This isn't me. And kind of like a Rosenoff and even a Hollander, my relationship to sexuality, even though I am predominantly gay, it has felt much more fluid and nuanced. And certainly my relationship to also masculine feminine energy has felt more fluid and nuanced. So I've never liked the boxes that have been created. I've never liked the labels and what to me feels like the baggage they carry. I understand for other people it's not baggage. For me, it's felt like baggage. Because I've literally been told, oh, you're the worst gay guy I've ever, I remember this, like when I first moved to LA, like, becoming friends with a young woman who was my neighbor. And she was like, you're the worst gay guy I've ever met, because I wasn't living up to, she wanted me to be her, like, fag hag. Or no, she would have been the fag hag. She wanted me to be like her, her gay accessory. And that's not who I am. And, it's like that stuff. I mean, again, even saying it makes me sad. Like it hurts my heart. I've felt so for me, I'm just bringing in a lot of layers here in response to what you're saying. Part of me does thrill to this show because, like I said, part of me is fucking resonating with this. I'm like, this speaks to my heart in a certain way, and this is something I don't see embodied a lot. And I also understand from that lens, the sexual political lens, there's going to be people who have issues with it because, it's not including a certain type of representation, and maybe people resent that. But then, like I said, on the flip side of that, I think that representation has been quite strong in mainstream media. So, I'm just responding to you with all of this.
No, I mean, I think it's incredible that you said all of that out loud, because I think I deeply relate to all of that, being a gay woman. And also, I have plenty of gay male friends who have reflected what you just said. They've reflected that back to me about their own personal feelings in their own lives. So I think it's a lot more common than people may think. It's not all like WeHo fucking like rainbow flags shooting out the people's asses all day long,
Well, and that's actually why Heated Rivalry to me actually feels very postmodern, because I think we know, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I think we all know that by now, right? Like, it's sort of like there was a moment in time where that was the stereotype and that was hugely represented. And what I love about the age we live in now is I feel like we're post that, where people do understand not everyone is like that. And there are these different facets of sexuality and gay men and what that means. And so it was almost like I felt like the world was ready for something like Heated Rivalry, because, again, maybe I'm being naive about this, or maybe this is just my viewpoint. It's like we can have these two guys, I think, and it doesn't have to mean we're necessarily excluding other types of representation. I feel like other types of representation have had a lot of say. And again, this is where I'll draw the parallel, just taking this off sexuality and homosexuality to the world at large. To me, I'm almost feeling Heated Rivalry is like the world is maybe ready to have a conversation about a certain type of embodied masculinity. And because we've done our due diligence with a lot of other types of representation, can we welcome this in now as an energy without it meaning that it's coming at the expense of something else, or that it is a toxic, it's like there's something implicitly toxic about holding this up on a pedestal. Yeah.
Jamie, yes, but you can't ignore that the very crux, the one and only conflict in this show, it's the tale as old as time. It's a coming out story. We're still not past. Yes, we can have the gay sex, and yet it's still a coming out story, which we've seen time and time again.
Well, that's also why I think it's interesting that it's dated. Because it does put it in a context of this isn't 2026. And, I think it would be harder. I mean, even though it's recent past, I mean, this, as you know, the conversation around homosexuality has changed remarkably fast. I mean, like kids growing up today, it is so different from when I was growing up, and I'm not that old. So I think the fact that it's set like 10 years in the past, I think kind of speaks to me, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's really about them coming out. And, spoiler alert, I think it also speaks to the way it plays out, where in some ways it's a very sort of gentle, like the coming out process is actually very gentle. And from what we've seen so far, it's kind of like low stakes. I mean, the parents are very accepting. There's not a lot, again, this isn't Brokeback Mountain. No one's paying for this with their lives. No one's contemplating suicide. So I think, yes, that does feed into the external dramatic stakes of the story. And yet watching it, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I personally didn't have the experience of like, oh, this is some deep life or death like you kind of get the sense everything's going to be okay the whole time. And it's,
well, of course, because it's based on a romance novel, and romance novels are always the same. The couple always works out in a romance novel.
Well, and also what I will say is, as much as I responded to Rosenoff and Hollander, and this is personal opinion, you guys, everyone's different, I did not respond to the secondary relationship between Kip and Hunter. And actually, to your point, because to me, that was so much more weighted on what I would call the gay angst and the doom and gloom of coming out. I mean, there's so many things with that storyline that I did not like. I mean, going back to the top of the episode, to me, this is like the early aughts called, and like gay indie cinema wants its storyline back. I mean, to me, it was just so much more. I mean, it was everything I was talking about, these cerebral, chatty characters, and just sort of like obsessing over like these sort of mundane details of their lives. I don't know. So that to me, I actually, in the words of Meredith Marks, I disengaged from their, right down to their like their stereotypical like romantic drama Notting Hill moments, you know, where he like is, you know, out on the ice and then he brings him out and he kisses. I was just like, shoot me now. It's like all the fire and the heat and the passion and the play to win of Rosenoff and Hollander. To me, it just came to this like deadening standstill with Kip and Hunter, where I was just like, what swampy molasses have we found ourselves in?
But Jamie, so imagine a world in which there were more hockey players with more storyline and more episodes. I'm telling you, heated rivalry wins because it's the less is more. It's giving you less is more. There's barely any lines in the first 2 episodes. There's barely any communication that is spoken.
You know, and I think it works. And, you know, for some reason, I don't know why this is coming up just as you were saying that, but like I was just thinking, you know, I read about how I think it was either Connor Story or the actor who plays Hollander. They were talking about how, you know, professional athletes like have reached out to them, you know, closeted professional athletes. And I don't know, like I was just suddenly like feeling those like closet professional athletes. And again, even though we are living in kind of this postmodern world where we all know that there's so many different types and facets of like sexuality and masculinity, it's like I do think that I don't know, it's almost like to me heated rivalry spoke out loud what's felt like a pretty quiet secret, which is that there is this type of unapologetic masculine energy that is filled with fire, heat, eros, and love. And I do think it actually can exist across sexual orientation lines. And actually, I can come up with examples of pop culture of guys who I think this is what's so interesting, right? It's like, are you watching the current season of Traitors?
Yes.
So, you know, I mean, Rob, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, Roush or Rush.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, he has kicked up a lot of response. And initially people were obsessed with him, loving him. Yeah. And I think because he is someone who embodies a lot of this archetype. And by the way, part of what I'm seeing, I mean, I spoke to this a little bit up top, but what I want to talk about with Rob Rush, if that's his name, and I'll bring in another reality TV player who has been the twinkle in my eye for over 20 years now, Rob Mariano.
Yes. It's Survivor. Yes.
Survivor and then Traitors. It's these guys who I actually think, and this is getting archetypal now, I actually think blend strong masculine energy with also strong feminine energy, you know? So Rob Mariano, what always made him thrilling is like, yes, he literally on Survivor, he is the hunter and the gatherer. He is the competitor. He wins food for his team. He builds shelters. Like this guy is an unstoppable force that penetrates the world. And, oh God, I'm getting chills just saying this, deeply intuitive, deeply sensitive, deeply in touch with like his gut, his receptivity, a nurturer. Like if you follow him on Instagram now, he is the one who's like cooking every meal for his girls. He's so connected to the home and to the hearth. And on Survivor All-Stars, you know, the fusion of his love for Amber and the way he like protected her, it's this fusion of like archetypal masculine and feminine energy. And again, I think we were seeing very similar things with Rob Rush of like, he's this embodied masculine guy who can win the challenges, you know, who can go out there and make things happen. Also very connected to his intuition. We saw a nurturer in him in the way that, you know, certainly like he was going to bat for Ron Funches. And, you know, you saw the way people were flipping out for Rob. And then conversely, when now he's not doing what everyone wants him to do. I mean, we're not going to get deep into that because I think it's a very nuanced conversation, but you know, he's turned essentially on his fellow traders. There's a lot of talk about his possible unconscious biases. Whatever's going on there, the fact is he's not doing things on TV that a lot of his fan base would prefer him to do. The level of like betrayal that you feel from people, the level of strong, angry energy that's going his way. And I think personally, it's because kind of like Rosenoff and Hollander on Heated Rivalry, I think he's embodying a certain type of masculine energy that has been dormant in the world. And I want to say, like, I say this as someone who is friends with so many of these guys because, you know, and this is where some of my privilege comes in because I am in a male body, but I have a ton of feminine energy and I'm attracted to men. So for me, because I think I'm not a woman, and I want to be clear. I have suffered at the hands of what we would call toxic masculinity. I was made fun of mercilessly growing up. I was an outsider. I know that pain. And still, I am in a male body. And for me, I don't think there's as much cultural baggage around unapologetic masculine energy as there is for a lot of women. So for me, I love it. I've never been afraid of it. And in fact, I love being friends with guys like these because I support them. I think their hearts are beautiful. I think their spirits are beautiful. I think their sexuality is beautiful. And so when I'm friends with them, I'm always like, this is a safe space for you to be all of who you are. And they typically love being friends with me because I support them in that way and it feels good. So I'm friends with a lot of these guys, and I know firsthand so many of these heart-centered, strong-loined, strong-spirited warrior guys, they are scared to own the strength of their eros and their sexuality. They're scared to own their heart-based aggression and their warrior energy because they're like, I don't want to be a toxic masculine. I don't want to scare people. I don't want to scare women. I don't want to be unsafe. And I want to be clear, these messages exist for a reason because we have lived in this patriarchal world where the idea of unmitigated masculinity has been destructive, right? So that's why I say it's sort of been like a secret. Like, I think a lot of this energy has been dormant, both because it's suppressed by the patriarchy, also because men are scared of it in themselves, even like loving men. And so then now we're getting hits of it. And so I think we're getting it in Heated Rivalry. We're getting it through guys like Rob Roche. And I think the longing for it is so fucking deep that when someone like Rob comes on the screen, people are like, oh my God, we love him, we love him, we love him, we're obsessed with him. But then in the place where we're still scared to open up to this and we're scared to trust men and we're scared to trust masculinity, when it feels like he's turning on us, it's like he fucking betrayed, like the trick was played on us again.
I think this segues beautifully into the fandom, the fervent fandom of Heated Rivalry, and now the conversation today in February 2026, a couple months after the show has aired, is about the toxic fan base, which is primarily these women who are living out these parasocial relationships with the actors. And, you know, they came to New York to do press. And I've lived in New York for years, for over 20 years. And I have not seen crowds like this since the days of TRL, which was like the MTV show where like the Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears and NSYNC and Justin Timberlake would be in the studio and they would have to shut down Times Square. And I have not seen anything like the reaction to Connor Story and Hudson Williams doing their New York press tour with like the Beatlemania throngs of fans outside the glass windows since 99, early 2000s.
Well, yeah, I mean, to me, that speaks to the depth of the collective longing. You know, I mean, I really believe this. I really believe, because again, in the place where there's been a destructive, quote unquote, toxic masculinity, that has supplanted healthy masculinity, which, you know, again, I think the way that got interpreted for so long was the sensitive new age guy. Like, I keep thinking, I hesitate to bring this name in because I know it's so charged. I don't know much about this case, you guys. I just, the personality, the energy that I feel separate from the case is like Justin Baldoni, but this kind of like soft, sensitive new age guy who's like, I'm speaking up for women. Like, I don't know, that kind of stuff just, guys, I don't know anything about the case. I'm not siding with anyone. I don't know anything about the case. I'm just saying what I've seen of him as this like self-appointed, I'm sensitive, I'm I think that sort of became identified with like healthy masculine. And I think there's just been such a huge gap of like, no, actually, there is a version of healthy masculine energy that has all the wild, healthy aggression, eros, playing to win. Again, what we're seeing in Heated Rivalry. And I think there's such a longing for it because, again, archetypally, that type of masculine will make it safe for those of us who have strong feminine energy to fully surrender to our feminine energy, you know?
But do you think it's also the fans are projecting, they are projecting something onto these actors? You know, there's a lot, there's a projection of them wanting to be the characters. There's a projection of owning their careers. I think the fact that these were two unknowns, also, that's another reason that this show is successful, that they came in with zero baggage.
Yeah, well, I think it's like, that's what I'm saying. I think it's like misplaced longing. I think it's misplaced desire. I think it's misplaced excitement. So I think, I mean, through the lens that I'm looking at this, it's almost like, look, again, heated rivalry, heat, fire. I think it is triggering suppressed heat in so many of us. So it can trigger suppressed heat in the men who have that fire. And then it's triggering the repressed heat in those of us with feminine energy and the women who long for that. And it turns them on so fucking much. So I think, again, in the place where there's not consciousness around this conversation, and also maybe it still feels unsafe to own what it's bringing up in us collectively. Well, okay, there's this heat, there's this excitement in me, something's getting activated. Oh my God, let me be obsessed with the show. Oh my God, it's about Connor and Hudson. Oh my God, are they really together? It's like energy that wants to move somewhere. And it's sort of in some ways just safer to make it all about the show. Just like the way people put Rob on this fucking pedestal, making these like, you know, collage or whatever those are called, like these reels for him. And like, oh my God, he's perfect. He's everything and everything. And then suddenly he drops the ball and it's like, oh my God, he is the patriarchy, you know? And it's like, oh my God, there's a lot. It's like, it's sort of like where the collective meets, you know, the personal in that way, you know?
So I separately had sent you, there's like an extensive Reddit thread. Was there anything that jumped off the page for you in the Reddit thread, which really just are these regular people just chatting about their observations, or they're like chiming in themselves?
I just read it. So this was the thread where it was like, it was speaking to this parasocial reaction where people, where they were saying like there were a lot of women who were actually getting angry that it turns out Connor is actually gay in real life, the actor.
I assume they would be upset that Hudson Williams is probably straight.
The thread that you sent me was about certain sectors of the fan base.
Yeah.
Getting really wanting to believe that Connor and maybe Hudson were actually straight, and then finding out that he's gay, deeply upsetting them. Which again, to me, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. It's like, I think, and this is why I think it's important to bring conscious awareness to, in terms of all pop culture and celebrity culture, whether it's reality stars, movie stars, separating out that, yes, these people are standing in for something archetypally. And so, yes, they're a projection screen for all of us. And that's not inherently bad as long as we're conscious of the projection, you know, because when we're not conscious of the projection, then we make them responsible for the projection. And it does get tricky or nuanced, because do I think that these actors or celebrities or reality stars have personal relationship to the themes that come up in the projection? Of course, absolutely. That's why they're becoming an archetype for it. So with Rob Rush, or whatever his name is, Do I think there might very well be some blind spots and unconscious
Right.
biases that are playing into what also is his strategy? And I do think he's making some very smart choices, actually. This is a whole separate conversation, but it gets nuanced, right? It's like, yeah, do I think there's personal relationship to these themes? Yes, but still these are human beings, who are allowed to be on their journeys. And as long as they're not doing anything that's like, hugely destructive, or harmful to other people, they're allowed to be on their journey. And this is why I think it's so important for us to bring consciousness to where is the collective and the personal projection, not from a place of shaming myself, but that this is revealing something about myself. So if I am some overzealous fan who is so focused on Connor and Hudson and Rosenoff and Hollander, it's not about making the energy wrong. The energy is powerful. It's strong. This is the heat that the show wants to provoke. But I do think it is about stepping back and really taking a look at, okay, why is this so exciting to me? Like, what is this bringing up in me that I want for myself? Like, what do I want to embody here? What's the longing here? And then understanding that's not Connor Story's responsibility. That's not Rob Rush's responsibility. That's my responsibility. And that's where it can be a beautiful relationship where these people become sacred mirrors for our projections that reveal things about us individually and collectively. So that's what, look, this is why I like to have these conversations, just to bring possible awareness to like, there's an invitation here where like, there's a drama to decode and there's a reason why this is striking something. And like I said, I think it's striking this sort of fiery masculine energy that combines spirit, heart, and eros in an unapologetic way. But does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think the one thing that I was just going to circle back around to, again, I'm just so aware that you felt something, my words, not yours, like urgent about bringing in Queer as Folk, the American one. And I'm just curious, is there anything more you wanted to say about that or ask about that?
I was talking, do you remember a few years ago, Billy Eichner, he wrote and starred in this movie called Bros, which was going to be the first big gay romantic comedy starring a gay actor, all gay cast, whatever. And that was, I think it was critically successful, but it absolutely bombed at the box office. And he was really dragged through the mud and he cried homophobia and all this shit. And it's funny. My friend said, if Billy Eichner was better looking, Bros would have been a success.
This is tough for me because this is where there's an intersection in me between being a film buff and loving film and loving movies, and also someone who's worked in Hollywood, who I've never met Billy Eichner. I just have a certain energetic sense of him and his motives, and I didn't see the movie. I remember seeing the preview and having a very negative reaction.
I only bring it up because that is the most recent. That was a mainstream movie released in theaters. You see him having sex. He has an orgy in one scene. You see, this is not a Will and Grace. This is not a neutered gay man.
Yeah, but this is what I'll say. Again, I haven't seen the movie, but for me, what I go to with that is like, but yeah, packaged in this chatty, quirky, romantic comedy that checks all the boxes. And again, like, I'm just going to say it from the perspective of like a gay male who's like grew up in the 90s and is living in 2026 and is just sort of like all about being gay and gay this and gay that. It's like, I just look back to Heat of Rivalry and I'm like, I'm so much more drawn to Heat of Rivalry. I'm just like, let's get out of our fucking heads. I don't want the cute, chatty, quippy. Because again, it's just like, I don't know. This is me taking off like the drama decoder hat, the archetypal hat. This is just me, Jamie, speaking as a human being who has like my own responses as a viewer. It's just like, I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit about this world. I don't want to watch this chatty romantic comedy that's just all about sort of like, oh, the politics of being gay and being in a relationship, and we're going to talk about it. And then, yeah, it kind of had that fantasy of like, it's exactly what I was talking about earlier, like the heartthrob who's with the neurotic, dweeby, I'll say that to your friend. There was a time where these movies thrived. To me, this is like a relic. And then even like when you're talking about the sex, I'm like, is it arousing? Like, is it, and I'm not even talking about the present. Look, you could have two conventionally average Joes, and the way you film it, the buildup, the eros, it could be fucking hot as hell. Yeah. So I just want to say, like, to me, it's not even about, like, it's like, that's why I'm going over to Heated Rivalry, where I'm just like, you know what? These guys aren't in their heads. They're on the ice. They're making things happen. They're hot. It's erotic. It's actual chemistry. It's actual love. It's actual depth. And I'll just go back to it. Like, not having seen it, when I talked about like my sense of Billy Eichner's energy in relationship to this, I don't know him. He could be a great guy. It just felt like an ego vehicle. It felt like a vehicle for him to kind of like be the star of like a mediocre romantic comedy. I didn't feel any heat, any passion, any depth, any eros. And so to me, it's almost like apples and oranges. It's like, that's why Heated Rivalry, we're in the postmodern world. I'm ready for the warrior spirit. That's sort of like blasting through labels and boxes and sexuality terms. And it's like, I don't know, just these two guys who are in love. They're hard for each other. They care about each other. They're hot off the ice, in the ice. And rivalry isn't a tool of distortion or disempowerment. It's a tool of mutual empowerment in a way that just feels erotic and alive.
One little footnote
Yeah.
about Bros. The sex is mostly played for laughs. It's a comedy. And when I hear you saying you don't want any more of the chatty films, the chatty show, the cerebral stuff, I'll say a lot of what we are subjected to, be it through podcasts, like many of the top podcasts that are out, I'm thinking Las Culturistas, Seek Treatment, these are all led by gay male comedians. And so the audience is fed a lot of the same. And yeah, Heated Rivalry, Hudson Williams is absolutely humorless, that character. And Ilya, I actually find him to be hilarious, but he's not trying to be funny. He's just an asshole that comes off as amusing.
This is what it is. Do you know what voice I'm hearing, and do you know what voice I'm embodying, and what voice I'm speaking to right now?
What?
Like, yeah, I mean, in some ways you're right. It's like the voice is like, I'm so fucking tired of talking about this shit. I'm so fucking tired of being in my head. Like, right. Let's get into our hearts. Let's get into our loins. Let's get into our energy. I'm so fucking yeah, like I said, like the boxes, the labels, the categories of this and that. And like what Ilya and Hollander, Shane kind of embody is like, they embody the body. They are in their fucking bodies, on the ice, in the bedroom, in their hearts. And it's like, can we just drop into something deeper? And that's why I love that there's almost this like, just this effortless shifting in like the power dynamics of the bedroom. And like I said, there's even kind of gender fluidity, but it doesn't have to be named, and it doesn't have to be talked about. And it doesn't have to be this like, oh my God, like I'm gonna bottom or am I gonna top? It's just like, these are just two fucking guys who are hot for each other and have been exploring on their own, and now they're coming together in a body-heart fusion.
Yeah, like, you don't need the Woody Allen analysis of their inner monologues. I get it. Yeah, I get it.
I don't know if this is cultural or, I mean, look, I know this is me being very literal in my response to you. Like, I never liked Woody Allen movies. So like, I'm just not someone who, that's not my bag.
Right.
So I don't know if that's just personal to Jamie, or if this is cultural, or it's both, but that's the voice.
Clearly it's cultural, because this is such a success over these other pieces of media which failed on this level. They did not reach cult. This is a cultural phenomenon. So clearly there's widespread relation to what you're feeling.
Yeah, and that's why I go back to, I think the world's ready now. Like, I think, like, to me, everything that we've been going through, like, I'll bring everything to it, even things that have nothing to do with, like, sexuality. Like, well, actually, Me Too does have something to do with sexuality, but, like, Me Too movement, BLM, like, the level of just, I guess what I want to say is, I think, look, as flawed as our world is, and it is, and especially with, like, the division and the political climate right now, the truth is, the culture, like, conversation is getting more sophisticated, and we are getting more nuanced, and our capacity for nuance is hugely increasing. I think this is the gift of social media. My hat's off to the younger generations who I think are just like showing up in amazing ways. But the cultural capacity for sophisticated, nuanced conversation that can hold multiple truths at once and doesn't need to neatly categorize everything and like being in the head and figure out all the intellectual answers, I do think that's shifting. And that's kind of why I think like Heated Rivalry, it's the exact moment in time for a show like this, because it does feel postmodern in the sense that we've had all sorts of gay representation. So for me, it's sort of like we don't even need to make this about gay representation. This can be about the deeper fire, the deeper archetypal energy. Like I said, I think that's why it takes place 10 years ago, because it's not even really about the coming. Like that part's, I don't want to say it's irrelevant. I know there are still people who struggle to come out, but culturally it's kind of irrelevant right now. You know, we've been there, we've done that. This is a new story. And so, yeah, I think the world's ready for it. And I think that's why it's hitting now. And I do think that's a large part of what it is hitting. And I think to your point, that's why it's like, it's a short 6 episode, just like, it's a hard on. It's a hard on of a show, you know, it's a couple thrusts, you know, it's like spurting its seed.
Oh my God. All right. I think we said it all.
All right. So yeah, if I just sort of feel into Heated Rivalry as a narrative and really let myself sort of track what's here, yeah, I feel the invitation for deeper embodiment. I feel the invitation for a new version of masculine energy and masculinity that is neither neutered nor destructive. I think that's kind of how I want to say it, that it's fully embodied, hard-on masculine energy that is also fueled and filtered through the heart, led with the heart, and of service. Neither shut down nor destructive. And also the need for this to come online in a slow, steady way that creates safety for everyone, because there's a lot of cultural baggage around this. Trust needs to be earned. And I guess on that note, the questions I might leave listeners with is, what does the notion of the unapologetic, unmitigated masculine fire bring up in you? What does it make you feel? Where does it take you? And are you willing to visualize a world where a safe version of this exists? All right, Jess. Well, thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure and a joy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you.
You have so many exciting things going on. So just tell everyone all the different places they can find you and what they should be looking for.
Yeah, I would say just follow me on Instagram. Feel free to message me there. My account is Jess, JESSX NYC. And from there, you can link to, I do a weekly podcast that's gay pop iconography, very similar to what Jamie and I just did. And yeah, you can find all my stuff on Instagram, JessXNYC.
Okay, great. And as always, you guys can follow me at on Instagram at Jamie Stein, JAMIESTEIN, where I have exclusive content. And oh, you guys, I am now uploading these videos to YouTube. So if you prefer to watch things on YouTube, this will be up on YouTube. If you're curious about my work, head over to my website, hollywoodreadings.com. And as always, I'd love to hear from you guys. So if you have questions about the themes, the topics, your own hits, never be shy to DM or email me. All right, you guys, I'll see you on the flip side. Bye.